Okay, welcome back. Today, or in this video, wherever you are in the world and in time, we are going to talk about the Internet of Things, what it is, why it matters, and set up so that we can discuss basically what the legal considerations are, what kinds of issues it is that we need to think about. So, let's get on with it. Internet of Things, or you'll see the acronym capital I, lowercase o, capital T quite a lot. So IoT basically is a descriptor for a network of physical objects or things, each of which have sensors, technologies, software implanted in them, because they're connected and they have the purpose of connecting via the internet and exchanging data with other devices or systems over the internet. So the term itself, Internet of Things, is mainly used for devices that wouldn't usually be expected to have an internet connection and that can communicate with a network independently of human action. In one of your readings, they actually use the words dumb devices. And I guess they're thinking about things like our watches, our televisions, perhaps, our fridges. I have an Internet of Things fridge, temperature gauges, machines, printers, things that we wouldn't necessarily think of as being new technologies, things that have been around for a very long time and that were never connected to anything other than perhaps a power line in the past. Back in the 19th century, the first Internet of Things device probably could be traced back to a weather balloon that transmitted data using fine copper wires. By the early 2000s, we saw quite a lot of RFID radio frequency identification tags on consumer goods. So effectively goods could be tracked as they traveled around the world using that. And then as we saw more 3G and 4G wireless connectivity, we saw more devices being able to connect to the internet. So we see a range of different products or services. I'll just bring up this bigger document so you can have a look at it on the screen. For those of you listening on a podcast, I'm looking at the connection to benefit diagram that's looking at the cycle of being able to connect, to be able to use data, sensing and collecting, to then transport data, analyze that data, define actions to get value out of that data, and then ultimately to add human value. So again, ultimately when we're talking about the Internet of Things, what we're talking about is extracting value from data. So it's no surprise that we put this topic in with big data because both are absolutely fundamental ultimately to understanding the way that artificial intelligence works. And so we're moving from dumb to smart devices, and then ultimately we'll start next week talking about smart code. The next slide is from your readings again, from a website that explains how the Internet of Things works. There are a lot of business uses for Internet of Things, including keeping track of customers, of inventory, of the status of important components, so machinery that is self-diagnosing and perhaps even self-maintaining. There's a number of industries that have been completely transformed by the Internet of Things. Oil and gas. I actually, as a baby lawyer, worked in the resources area, and bizarrely, one of the reasons that attracted me to work in natural resources, I'm old enough that it was before we knew what we know now about climate change, but the thing that really attracted me was the way that the oil and gas industry really embraced technology. Now, isolated drilling sites can be better monitored with IoT sensors than by human intervention. Driverless vehicles are absolutely used in in situations in mines where humans would not be safe going down very dark, very narrow areas, and they can only do that by being connected. Another really interesting area is agriculture, being able to collect granular data about crops from Internet of Things connected sensors can be used to really determine to the minute almost when things should be picked, when harvest should begin, what the likely yields are going to be, a range of different things. Fantastic for water conservation and for ensuring the right balance of nutrients going to plants. Climate control systems in HVAC can be absolutely monitored from an absolute distance. And of course, brick and mortar retail, we can now use IoT to micro-target customers with offers. The famous one here is Starbucks. For some years now, have been using IoT to essentially send text messages to customers that are close by their stores in the US, so that the customer can just respond with a yes or no, and the barista, shall we call them that? Yes, the barista in the cafe can start making their order. There are a range of different areas, though, where Internet of Things can really make business hum. And so the readings that you have, the two websites in particular, are focused on that. The other thing that I brought out on the image that's on the slide here is just a little overview from that reading about how edge computing works. Edge computing is sometimes referred to as fog computing. They're very similar. They're not exactly the same, although some would say that fog computing is just a Cisco brand name for edge computing. But basically, edge computing is an alternative to cloud computing. Cloud computing is not going to be viable for many Internet of Things applications because it effectively requires too strong and too consistent a connection. Edge computing provides a distributed approach to monitoring and addressing and processing data. So it would be costly and time consuming to send that data for processing and analysis to the cloud, and so edge computing techniques are used instead. Edge or fog computing reduces the bandwidth that is needed and reduces the back and forth communication between sensors and the cloud, which can negatively affect performance, and basically provides for that singular, immediate transfer of data. The next slide I want to show you, and again, it might be worth you looking at this while you're listening to me, if you're listening on the podcast, is this idea of IoT making sense. Now that's a little play on words there. I've used that because I've kind of come up with this acronym. Actually, to be fair, it may not be me who came up with it. I'm actually not really sure where I got this from, but I've used it in a number of different places. It feels like me, but it might not be. So basically, because Internet of Things is so much about having sensors that can communicate with the world, whether that's the sensors that you might have on your smartwatch or your smartphone, smartwatch, here I am, or smartphone, or whether it is a sensor that's in the ground monitoring whether or not your plants need to be watered or your fridge is cold enough. That probably would be in the fridge, not in the ground, but I think you know what I mean. I've used this acronym SENSE. So again, take a look at this. I hope that it'll help you understand what we're talking about here, because IoT is all about sensing, efficiency, networking, being specialized. IoT devices don't do everything. They do one thing on the whole, and the ubiquitous nature nature of these devices. My guess is that you probably have, wrong button again. My guess is that you probably have an IoT device close by to you. I know I do. I've pointed to my watch before. I have a smartphone. Clearly, I have a camera. I have a garage door remote. I'm just looking around my desk at the moment. I have smart TVs that I use as monitors. There are so many different things, but they're not just household and consumer goods. We're seeing these devices significantly in industrial uses as well. Just as a challenge, why don't you see how many connected devices there are in the room you're in or in the house that you are in now? Be really interested to see. And this is particularly interesting because it's not that long ago that we had very few connected devices. The graph that you see on the slide comes from one of the readings that you've been asked to do, and demonstrates how rapidly the growth of Internet of Things devices has been. Nearly every market forecast there is shows the industry growing to $1 trillion plus industry within the next 10 years. One of the more conservative estimates, according to the reading that you've been asked to do, sees IoT analytics at a $1.6 trillion industry by 2025. So again, as I started to say before, way more than just a smart speaker. I could ask Bixby, Alexa, Google, Siri to give me some information about this market, but you can see that actually by category, we're seeing way more Internet of Things happening in smart city, connected industry, connected buildings, and connected cars than we are in our consumer segment. Now that means that as users, we are interfacing with connected devices often without knowing about it. We don't know the extent to which the traffic lights or the button that we pushed across the road is connected to the internet and what that means. And that raises a whole lot of issues for all of us, which we will be exploring in a little bit more detail, in the next video, which will be coming very shortly. Cheers.